Welcome to Hashtag Analytics, a conversation between two individuals, one that's super passionate and one that's super opinionated, both around the topic of analytics. I'm Ann Jackson, joined with my co-host, Luke Sankey. Luke, who do we have with us today, and what are we going to talk about?
We've got the triple threat. Chris Love, he is an Ultrix ace, he is a Tableau Zen master, and he is a games master?
Games master.
I'd go with that, yeah.
And we're going to be talking, we have Chris here today to talk about a number of things that he's doing, but Chris really just wanted to come on and disagree with us for an hour, so we thought, hey, that's a perfect
an hour of arguments. Bring it on.
We'll see if that happens.
So first question I have to get the discussion started is we're seeing a lot of what I'm going to call kind of pop visualizations. We're seeing a lot of people creating visualizations, and then you're seeing people iterate off of the same concept over and over again, and it's getting really popular. What are your thoughts on that as it relates to the Tableau community and the data visualization community?
For me, I don't see there's too much wrong with doing that, assuming that people are actually learning something. A lot of what we see produced is people experimenting, and they're having fun. They're doing stuff that they're not necessarily getting a chance to do at work, and they're creating really attractive different visualizations. I think that for me, the point it gets a little bit controversial or difficult is when they take something that someone's templatized and done and turned into just a set of instructions. So I talked about the Sankey blog recently. Things like that, where you're just following a set of instructions and stepping through it and then throwing something on a page without thinking of the meaning. That's when people are just taking a concept and almost taking it to the end conclusion, destroying it, if you like.
I think the Sankey is probably a good example. I know that I have been asked to build a Sankey using, I think, one of your templates, Chris, so I can call you the bad guy in this situation in a business scenario. Do you guys think that there's a big opportunity to have Sankeys in a business environment, or is that where you feel like it's kind of lost its purpose and it deserves to be more in like the public-facing vein? I know, Luke, you always think a lot about optimization and production ready. Is a Sankey built in Tableau production ready?
Believe it or not, with all the stuff I put out, that's like my constant thought. I mean, I'll just say that right now I have the perfect business case for Sankey, a Sankey diagram, and that is to follow, looking at add values as they follow through 3 stages and wanting to know what percent is in the second stage, where they start, how many are in a certain spot in the second stage versus the third stage. And I'm struggling to figure out how do I show essentially the nuances of those layers without just having a giant table. So maybe that is a use case for it, but I think one of the issues that comes up is that we see when they're used that it's not here's the start and here's the beginning. It's more like here's a demographic variable and here's a demographic variable, and now you can just see whatever that means. It's about the purpose of the visualization and having it used correctly. And that said, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I do know that if they feel overused, and there are a lot of things that feel overused because they're being used incorrectly.
Yeah, and I always talk about it like, we're telling simple stories using very complex mechanisms. A Sankey chart is a very complex visualization type to understand. Therefore, it takes time to work through and understand and look through. So it's got to be suited to something that the viewer is going to take that time to do, which isn't necessarily consumed through a Twitter feed of social media stuff. What it's great for is getting that initial visual hit that says, look, I've done something difficult in Tableau. Difficult being in inverted commas, because now it's not got to be that difficult because everyone's templatized it. So I think they're being used for visual effects far more than actual analytics effects. And this is where a lot of these techniques end up going. They're visual bling rather than the reason we're here. The reason we're here is because we're telling stories with data, and we need to do that to help the audience understand what what the message that we're giving, what the data's telling. And if the visualization doesn't do that, then it's failed.
So then I'll be the argumentative one then. So if by what you guys are saying, to some degree, it's like, well, then we're at bar charts and line charts, right? We're at the simplest way to tell the most direct story and to use it as a visual aid to help demonstrate, the data, right? So I get that, right? But what about the other side, the flip of the coin, where people could say, by introducing some of these more complex visualizations that are less easy to understand, we are, I don't want to say elevating, but we are making the masses, the public, more literate of these forms of understanding complex relationships.
Are we making the public more,
or the business? I don't know. I mean, it's a question.
Are we just making the developers less literate about the use of it because they're being used incorrectly?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a debate, right? I mean, you've seen good and bad Sankey charts. You've seen good and bad everything. Like, certainly, if the Sankey were never popularized, would it have an opportunity, Luke, to live in your business scenario?
It's only being implemented because I'm aware of the chart type, and I know how to do the math without following a template.
I think the other end of the coin, and from what you're describing, is we make people literate, but we don't necessarily make them literate on what they're good for. So I've been asked for Sankey charts, or heard of people being asked for Sankey charts by managers who've literally seen that Tableau can do it, and they think they want that nice looking chart. They don't really know what it should be used for, and so they're asking for the chart type first, and that's a huge problem. As soon as you go any chart type first, you're losing the path to again understanding that data and telling the data story.
Yeah, I see. I won't disagree with you there. I think the data should quite often lead whatever the visualization is going to be. At Tapestry, there was someone who said that words lead visuals, like words are more important than visuals, and words can lead you down the path of what visual to choose, which I think there is a lot of truth there. If you're going to say a comparative statement, then you know what type of visualization that you should use. But certainly if someone is just scrolling through the Pinterest of charts and they see one that they think is cute, that they want to hang on their office cubicle, then there's some misinformation going on there. There's some misappropriation of how we're getting smarter about understanding data.
Yeah, and I would say even particularly in the business world, I recently came across a situation where I had to critique some work from, and one thing that was in there were like the half circle bar charts that just randomly showed up in the bottom right corner of a visualization, and I just thought, there's a classic case of someone wanted to just put something fancy in just because they had it in their head, and it didn't serve of any purpose. But the domain owners loved the idea of the chart, and I just kept coming back to it and saying, all right, you have this chart type, you really like it, but how does it serve the business better than just a bar chart? Plus, it's not performant. Like, you just put a bar chart in there and it just does the job. And instead, someone's doing some data identification on the back end to, plot multiple points to build all these bars. And they hadn't even thought about performance as a criteria for insights. And again, it's not providing any additional insights. It's just, it's chart porn, right? It's just this thing that people get really excited about because it's there and it doesn't serve its purpose. And I think we keep coming back to it. It's like, a chart needs to serve the purpose of whatever it was designed for, and developers need to be thoughtful about how they do that, and they need to be thoughtful about it because they need to teach end users how to be literate, or teach them to be literate in the sense of like advanced literacy using data. So moving from the everybody's college ready to now they're all on graduate school of charts and visuals.
I think that there's two other points I want to pull on here as well. I think what we often do in the community and on Twitter is we create static visuals to tell a story that we know in advance, and that's one type of data visualization that we know the story, we've seen it in the data, and now we can tell that story. Often in the business world, we're trying to create stories that we don't know about, because the data is going to change. In 2 months' time, the data will be very different. And so a chart type has got to try and cater for the ways the data is going to change. And a Sankey, if you create it with a set thing in mind, it might change. So the simpler bar charts, line charts allow you to go down that road of coping with that change in much better ways. I think that the second point that it's worth pulling out is the effect on the community that a lot of these chart types being out there have in terms of newcomers. I was doing a demonstration recently, and I Googled Tableau gallery and just put it in Google image search. And the first two visualizations that came up in that image search were both Sankey diagrams. Now, anyone new coming to the Tableau community, looking at Tableau, wants to see things that they want to do. They want to come to a community that is already doing what they know. And that's very different. When you look at Power BI, for example, and other, Click, etc., they create a lot of their gallery is 4 pane dashboards, things that people already know. And I kind of think we've got a bit of an identity crisis in the Tableau world at the moment, where what we're doing in the community and what this public face is showing is very different to what the consumers want. And it's maybe pulling us away from that end business owners. And there's a danger that people look at it and say, well, I don't want that. I want something that's very simple, that's like what we're doing now.
So you think like if you were to have like a balance and one's like pragmatism and the other one's innovation, we're tipped a little too far on the innovation side of things right now, and being pragmatic has fallen?
I think so. And
I don't know. Do you really?
Innovation's not the right word, Luke. Is that the problem?
Yeah. Are we being innovative in the community? Like, what?
That's a good question.
Would name the first chart type that has been invented ever in Tableau that is truly has been like a completely new chart type that doesn't exist somewhere else. Everything has already been created. It just hasn't been appropriately attributed to individuals. I just feel like, I think what happens though on the innovation sense is that people who are trying to lead the way in the community of Tableau is they look at things that are happening in the D3 world and they say, oh, like that D3 is artist driven or application driven, and I want to duplicate, I want to replicate, I see this chart type, I want to create that in Tableau. And I look at you talked about the Power BI and the Click gallery. If you look at the gallery for D3, you see a couple of the traditional chart types, but then it immediately goes into like force directed graphs, steam graphs, Roni diagram. And people are thinking, oh, I want to do that. I want to create a template for that so others can misuse that potentially. I get it. Like, I'm conflicted on the idea of having a template because, as you know, it just allows anybody to do it without thinking, and you need to think. But at the same time, it then makes it accessible. So that's where I don't know how I feel about it.
Like, I'd rather them have the template and at least somewhat get it right and have it be more performant if they're going to go down that path. And maybe there's some some abstraction of information so they could more easily understand that there's good knowledge that's born out of the building of these templates, the writing of how someone got to this point that shouldn't be lost. So then my question is, if we're saying that we're living in a world of viz porn where you have to have something really shiny to click on it, to like it, how do we as people in this community do better, or should we do better? Is it a matter of I'm just going to like every bar chart I see and everything else gets a pass? Is it retooling the algorithm on Twitter?
I don't think.
It's a good question. Because it's a thing of social media, isn't it? This is you like things that look different. With the best will in the world, it's very difficult to like as you say, every single bar chart. They're just the visitors we're producing for social media have a certain audience that we're trying to connect with, and that's very difficult to bring out. I think what we need to do is focus more on the story and the analytics behind the story. What is someone what message is someone communicating? Is the chart types they've communicated suitable? And go a lot deeper into the visualizations and share those that tell simple stories, complex stories in a simple way, or complex stories in a complicated way, not simple stories in a complex way.
You think that people choose to, this is what's coming into my mind, people use complex visualizations because the story is simple, as a way to make it seem better?
To make, yes, they have relatively simple data sets, and what people try and do is two things. They try and add more complexity to the visualization type because they're trying to learn, which is fine, or to, as you say, jazz up the story. But they also then try and draw out meaning from the data that they can't necessarily do. So they try and we wouldn't do this at work. We wouldn't say that things have gone up because of X, Y, and Z, but we do that when we're looking at data for the first time on Twitter without any knowledge about it. Because we want to attribute something to that data and tell a story about it. And that's not data driven.
A lot of people use publicly curated data sets that other people have curated that have a journalistic story behind them that draw out some sort of headline as, I don't want to say an excuse, but as an additional reason to be able to draw a conclusion. If someone else drew this conclusion, then it must be okay for me to be able to create a chart to support that same conclusion.
Yeah, that's right. And often the data on its own doesn't support that conclusion, or it's just supposition. It's an opinion, and it's very often backed up by poor analysis, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I think where I still have great difficulty in the public facing community is saying anything with data. I don't like to lead with a headline because there's too much of an opportunity to be wrong, and you're oversimplifying something that you likely can't explain.
And you can't do that really quick. If you're trying to create a visualization every week, you can't spend the time doing the due diligence on the data to understand its sources, especially if someone else has curated it for you, or you're taking it from a chart that someone else has created. You either present the data as it's already been presented and just say, this is what I found, but you certainly can't say, this is what it tells me, or this is why that data is happening.
I think it sounds like what you're advocating for is more of like a journalistic approach to using data. And I think what we see often on all the great websites that are the news websites that are very data driven, they have data driven teams, is they produce these beautiful pieces with, I'm going to use the term elegant, but they're just really simple visualizations that tell the story. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of people are trying to do that, but then get caught up in trying to also make really fancy visualizations that tell the story. But they try to do it in a week, and they don't realize is that it takes more than a week of research to figure out. And I think the issue actually comes down to is that we, as a community, we have these data sources available to us. They're already curated, and we just use one data source to tell the story. And often what you need to do is you need to bring together multiple data sources. And that's maybe what's lacking a little bit, is that we don't see people connecting the dots. I actually wrote this down in terms of things that I need to get better at, is using multiple data sources.
Yeah, and that's something, we Rob Radburn and I tried with DataBeats, is to start that analytical, journalistic style of visualization, just to try and do something a little bit different to what we're seeing in the community. And it is really difficult. We spend weeks on the data, we spend weeks collecting data, and then we go through these visualizations that end up getting more and more simple because you try and explain them. You try and tell a story, and as soon as you realize who you're trying to tell the story for, and we were very specific, our audience, we wanted it to be our parents, our neighbors, people who weren't in the analytics community. And as soon as you try and do that, then it gets a lot harder to try and do things like that with complex data sources. So you've got to be very mindful of the audiences, and I don't think we practice enough with different audiences and different visualization styles.
So I still think there's that lingering component that's always going to be there, which is people are attracted to things that are new and unusual and different. Do you guys have any, what are your thoughts on some, and I don't know the answer to this, that's just why I'm asking, like, what are some ways that we can do that? So typically it's either with words or with something new and different from a visual perspective. How can we entice someone to get in, being interested in data is a hurdle and a battle all of its own. How can we help people become engaged about what it is they're looking at if we don't rely on these more tried and true, we'll call marketing tactics?
I think perhaps we need to find ways of people finding their own data sets in simpler ways. Not everyone's got access to ways of web scraping. Not everyone's got access to the same things that we have to try and find data. So trying to open up avenues to people getting data about themselves. Everyone loves to talk about themselves. A lot of the existing web data connectors in Tableau allow you to do that, but trying to open that up more and more will get more and more people interested without having to curate these data sets for them.
That's a really tough question, right?
I think there's something to what Chris has said, like force them to analyze it themselves so that they become interested is, I think, another good tactic, or bring them along through the build journey as opposed to just serving them up something at the end can be quite helpful.
I think this is what Chris is getting at with some of the stuff he's been doing with Rob, which is not exposing everybody to all of the data. Tell that story. Think about what your end user, you want them to do. Do you want them to just be informed, or do you want them to actually dive in to the data? At work, I feel like there's too much self-exploration. You just say, here's your filters, click on these, dive into this. And I feel like it should be something completely different where, and I tell this, my approach to this is it should feel like you're at a museum, it's a guided tour. You know what the outcomes are generally going to be always, or how things are related. And you want individuals to start with those high level values and kind of explore the data, and they can explore it in 50 different ways. But the outcome, when they leave the interactive tool that they're working in, they all have the same conclusion.
The thing that's nagging at me as you say that is, although I think that there's value in that, and to some degree there should be sort of guides to help go through that analytical thought process. The backlash to that, and I think part of why we're in this like super exploratory world, is that there's been such little trust with business data up to this date. Like, I've someone who's actively said, I don't believe what you've said. I want to see the data and I want to do it myself. And I think that particularly lies more in the business realm than anywhere else. Or maybe I've just worked for bad companies. I don't know.
No, I completely agree. I think there's a lot of mistrust about data there, and certain people want to feel it and touch it, and that's why people still want to take data back into Excel and work with it to understand it and know that what they're adding up makes sense.
I think it's that's always. People want to bring it back in Excel, but you should almost be like, here's access to the Tableau workbook. Go in and explore what we've created. And if you want, come up with enhancements and we can make it better. Feel free to explore it, because it's still going to be better than dropping it in Excel and creating some bar graphs, which you could have just already done in Tableau and actually have that information available. So
I think for me, that's why I'm really excited about NLP and being able to ask questions. I think still when we're working with particularly senior managers and people like that who've got that distrust of data, they don't have time to do it in Excel. They don't have time to learn web exploration and exploring data within Tableau server. So just being able to ask questions and find things out is for me really exciting, because it just gives us an additional means to get to them and do things really simply.
I've always been very skeptical of the search functionality that could be available, but I've more or less come to grips, or at least I've found an ideal business case for it. So I do feel a lot better about the functionality existing, especially if you have a reporting team that they're, say, reporting to C-suite, and all their job is to do is answer whatever the random question that's coming from individuals, and they don't care about any relationships. They just want to know high-level metrics, and they have been stuck using Tableau in the sense of, here are our 40 filters, and here's our crosstabs. Now they can just do a quick search, and I do feel much better about that.
So at least from the Tableau world of things, how I've understood it to be at this point, and one of the things I'm excited about in relation to what you guys are talking about, I think it does eliminate the ad hoc emails. I think it's really going to force into the spotlight more, even if possible, like data curation and metadata curation, because a lot of that really works successfully by someone setting up names and relationships among fields and having a very we'll say a data set on, that's on guardrails or whatever, that has guardrails around it so that they can get the right answers from those things. It's not just some sort of like dump of data that it's all over the place that someone else is untangling. It has to be more forward facing.
And thinking about those data sets and how you create them is often something that's missed. People want to train in the end dashboards, not in the access to the underlying data. And so the more we can do to expose that and get people using underlying data within the business to make them realize that a lot of what they already need is already created for them in terms of that data set, and they can go off and start exploring it is really key for me. I think that's a really important thing that still not enough companies get to understand.
Chris, I mean, you're in a great spot. You work at Information Lab. I'm just here, like, I'm going to go a little bit on a tangent here. Like, what we're all seeing that. What else are you seeing that companies are doing that we should be thinking about that are sort of maybe gaps in the industry? I think this is one of them, right? We're not thinking, we immediately are like, oh, just dashboard data is perfect data, and we're not thinking about the metadata behind it to develop this. What else? What are, like, this is not just for Chris, but Chris and, like, where are the other gaps that we're seeing?
So I'll say one. I want to give Chris an opportunity, but mine is going to lie around the iceberg. I'm so tired of that iceberg analogy. That's one that I would love to drop. The whole 80% on data prep, data readiness, and 20% on presentation, because the presentation is where the magic happens. So still think there's opportunity there. That's number one on my mind. But Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's around, and maybe this is the same thing redressed up, but it's still around self-service and true self-service. We're all in businesses that make money off creating content for others, because that self-service still isn't adopted widely enough. People don't trust their end business users to create that. They're still thinking about people having teams of people who create content for others, and so trying to continually break down those barriers and make software easier and easier to use, and get people trying it and using it and answering their own questions is still the big battle and the big gap that most people are missing.
It's so true as you say it, and I just think about the lack of process around what self-service looks like, and a lot of industry leaders not actually knowing what they're like. It's ad hocly, new word, being put together. But in the last year or so, I feel like I've had exposure to enough different centers of excellence that I'm starting to understand what works and what doesn't work. And it really does come down to, you have to develop a true center of excellence, have experts that are there, that own the tools and can really not just have that as a part-time job, as I'm project managing one thing, but I'm also the Tableau owner or all self-service owner. Like, you need those supports, and then you need a few individuals that just know the tool inside and out. And then you can have individuals that are out doing self-service if you can support each of those areas. It's just really hard, and no one a lot of companies don't want to put that investment into it, but that's what ultimately they need. They're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on these tool sets, and the the last step they need to take is to spend a little bit more on headcount to properly execute the delivery of these. They're thinking, oh, well, this tool didn't work, I need to switch to a different tool. It's not about the tool, it's about the execution of it via the appropriate individuals to support it.
And often what they're doing is creating dashboards that try and answer all those questions to save people having to self-serve. And in the end, it's a lot easier to just give them access to the data and trust them to doing that self-service. But there's still that fear of people getting the wrong answers and multiple answers to the same question being created. And getting over those hills is still the biggest battle. There's a big fear of people using data in the wrong way because they're not trained to.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think another thing I would kind of say, I mean, Luke, when you talk about having the tool, it's not the tool, it's the people. I mean, that's like buying a treadmill and thinking that you're going to be able to run, right? Like thinking you're going to be able to run a marathon. Like it's not going to happen there. You have to actually leverage it. One thing that I've seen differently, and there's kind of two things here, because part of this we've been on this as a society, we've been really generating content. Like that's the new frontier of what businesses do, of what we do, right? We generate social media, we generate pictures, whatever. So a lot of the organizations I work with, they are generating analytical tools to be for their forward-facing clients. And those, I think, at least from my experience, have to live in a more pristinely designed capacity. They are more static in that regard. And when I say static, I mean they're not open to continuous iteration. But what I found for businesses that I've been working with that are using visual tools, dashboards, charts, is those should be evolving more quickly. They should continue to. I have a project I'm working on right now where everything that we made at the beginning of the year is obsolete because we've just we've rebuilt it all because we're answering better questions or we're looking at the data differently. And that's, I think, something that we don't value yet inside of the business. And a lot of that comes from people ask us a hard question. We want to get to the answer. We want to solve the challenge and move on. We want to tick the box. We want to go to, whatever the next project. I won't say sprint because sprint is very iterative. But I think that that's something that could be done better within the vein of what it is that we do from a professional perspective.
I think you're talking about the difference between classic analytics or just reporting and self-service itself, where you are supposed to be, instead of having a static report, asking deeper, more meaningful questions and developing products around that. Actually, that what you said earlier actually struck a chord with me, is because of that. Like sometimes you have these things sitting on server that individuals are interacting with, and they're afraid to update those documents because they're afraid once you change something, no one's going to understand it. And the value of change management, again, not having individuals to support that change, is a huge issue as well.
I'm with you. I mean, I'd say the majority of, I don't want to say data problems, but the vast hurdle to overcome is always going to be people. People are at the center of all these things. I mean, we're using this stuff to help people understand, help people change their processes, to do things differently. And the people component is going to be the number one obstacle every time.
Yeah. I think implementing Tableau at an organization, I always talk about it being a change management process. You're not just installing a tool and hoping people will use it. You're trying to change the culture of a company. And if a company is not ready to change and not ready to embrace that, then it doesn't really matter what tool they pick at that point. They've got to be ready to pick something up and do something different with it. And that's where Tableau is unique in that way, because it can support that self-service analytics, that data exploration. But you've got to be ready to use it for those means.
So we've talked about the need to help people change and to keep data accessible. And we've talked about how it lives in like the popular world of, certain visualizations, those kinds of things. How do we merge those concepts and start having more of these discussions in an open way and talk about the trickier aspects of analytics, talking about how do we change hearts and minds around data, that component, as opposed to just, hey, you made something great. How
do you get people to be better at their craft?
And how do you do that without putting people off and without criticizing everything that goes on Twitter, and without almost unwanted criticism as well. I think it can get to the point where people are just posting stuff and they'd like praise. They need confidence to carry on, and they can't have some guy who's seen hundreds of Sankeys in his life just slacking it off because he doesn't think it's right. This might be their first contact with the Tableau world, and so whatever way we try and come over this, it becomes very difficult, because you want people to stay engaged, and you want people to enjoy the process of visualizing, which is why we're there. I think, to be honest, the honest answer for me is getting away from Twitter, getting away from social media. You can't have a good analytics conversation within whatever the character limit is on Twitter. Is it 240 characters or whatever? Because it's always going to come across wrong. So we need to, some of the deeper conversations I've had and the most useful conversations have been over DM or in person. That's why Rob and I work so well, because we can sit down together. He lives half an hour away, and we can go through these things in person or on a Skype. So small working groups of people who are trying to solve the same problem might be one way of being able to do that.
Yeah, and I just think, like, finding people in your immediate, like, if you're going to be you only can really work with a small set of individuals. So if you're going to do that, have people in your crew who are going to critique your work in a thoughtful way and not just be a yes machine for you. I mean, it's great when Anne tells me I'm doing a great job. I feel, which never happens, but which I don't like that. Like, I want you to say, here are all the things that I'm thinking about, and I want individuals, when they're critiquing me, to do that. And I hope that others want that meaningful feedback, so it does feel like your first draft. If you create, like, anything you're creating and you're going to put it on social media, and you're going to do it for the likes or whatever you're going to do it for, because ultimately, if you're going to put it on social media, you put it there for a reason. That's typically to show off your skills in some way and then get some sort of minute praise for it. If you're going to do that, like, don't be afraid to fail and this comes back to that concept of what I call, like, slow viz, is if you're going to spend time putting together a visualization, go through it and iterate on it, and be all right with it, the first version not being a very successful version of what you're crafting, because it is probably not the best. Like, name one thing. The only thing I can think of where, like, the first version that ever came out of it was successful was the Gangster's Paradise by Coolio. He, like, wrote that in, like, 2 minutes, and it was, like, a true, like, the rest of the folklore around how things were, like, symphonies that were created very quickly, are all BS. And Anne knows this. Like, I've shared a book with her on if you read The Creative Curve, it talks about individuals, how they create these things really quickly, and you hear stories about it. But really, there's, like, constant thought being put into it, and maybe they craft a good version. And we just need to, like, none of us are savants in our field, and we need to be okay with having our first version of something we create be something we just throw away right away. Mm. There's something that was put out by Spencer Bakke maybe a month ago, and the first, he, like, shared it with me, and he was like, "Hey, Luke, what do you think of this?" And I was like, "Well, like, here's some things to think about." And he shared it with a bunch of other people as well, and what came of it was something completely different from the original. And that's how we all should be approaching this. We shouldn't be wanting our first version to be the best version, or just making minor tweaks to, like, the fonts or the spacing of it.
Yeah, I think there's a myth around that a lot of what we see hasn't been through that process, and that people are getting it right first time. Yep. And sharing those iterative steps, I think, is key as well. And as you say, exposing the fact that we don't get that right as leaders in this field. We need to expose the fact that we're not getting it right.
I like that Johnny Walker has been posting, like, he's been developing a visualization for 6 months, and he's constantly just posting, like, well, here's the one thing that I changed. And it doesn't, like, it, you can kind of see the pieces coming together and the vision for it, but it's exposing individuals to rough drafts is the best thing we can use Twitter for, is being like, yep, draft 1. here it is.
Yeah, I think the one thing, I guess, to argue with that a second is that sometimes that I've done that and then it ruins the build up to the final release. You want something to land with a bit of novelty, and for people,
if you want the likes, then you can
exactly
you can hold it back. We're all guilty of it. Like we're like, let's just like wait a little bit longer. But I know this last year I've tried to be super transparent about the process, because this is one thing that has bothered me, where I've been like, oh, I really want I want to surprise people. But this year it was more about, okay, you want to see the amount of work I'm putting into it? Like, here's where I started, and you can start seeing some of the pieces coming together. But look, it took a month to create this, and you sort of saw where it was a week in, and it looked identical, but or you saw like parts of it that looked basically the same. But that's how long it takes to iterate and get something correct.
So is slow vising the right word for that? Is it iterative?
I use it's a play off the slow food movement, where it's like you're keeping things local, you're doing things in a slow way. But yeah, it's not. It's definitely just iterate is a better way.
I think, one of the things that's what Tableau is absolutely fantastic at, the fact that we can iterate very quickly and we can change our design and move into totally different directions and iterate through chart types and find the right one very quickly. I think sometimes what I see of perhaps what I'd call the true slow viz world, things like Johnny Walker sharing his work in progress that seems to take forever to create. Why is that even in Tableau? Why are people going to that length to bend Tableau in such a way that it's not Tableau anymore? Why isn't Johnny using Illustrator to do that?
I think
because you lose all the power of Tableau.
Well, I don't think that it's incorrect to use if you have a lot of data. About like the strength of Tableau and is its ability to process lots of data and then create lines or polygons or dots, whatever, really quickly relative to the other tools that exist in the industry. So there is an argument for those if you're using them correctly. And those other tools, someone originally had to write the code to create those complex visualizations. So, to argue against that point is that some people are just pioneering those or just bringing those ideas in because they have not yet been brought in. And maybe then templates are good, but
I'm going to say, yeah. So I think it's people trying to look cool. Like, it's like, I think we're all guilty of it. Like, hey, here's this data. I've got to make maybe not myself look smarter. Maybe and I'm not picking on Johnny or anybody. I think I'm guilty of this too. Like, let's make this more than what it is. Let's demonstrate it's more than it is. And then, like, I have been in conversations where people are like, oh, you only use Tableau. And I'm like, I build charts. It's a chart building tool. But there's this sort of, I kind of get this like little chip on my shoulder, like, oh, that's all I can do. That's all I know how to do is build charts in one little program. Let me show you that I can do more than that, right? So I would argue that that's some of it. That some of it is demonstrating just how much you can bend the tool to your way.
Yeah, and I've been guilty of exactly the same thing. I think, as you say, we all are. I wonder, are we bending Tableau too far in those examples and losing, Tableau isn't quick at interacting when it's on the web as quick as D3. You can't get the nice animations that you can get when you interact with things, the force directed stuff and that. If you're going to spend months and months creating this really arty visualization that's maybe not interactive, why aren't you using Illustrator? If you're going to create some data art that you really bend in Tableau in other ways, why aren't you trying to do it in D3? Is it because the Tableau community is going to just like it a bit more? Because if you release that in the D3 world, you'd probably get lots of people saying, oh, I've seen that before.
Could be. I mean, I think people could argue that their portfolio lies on Tableau Public, that their audience is Tableau consumers, so they keep it in the Tableau vein. Like, there's lots of things that you could say that seem like that they are reasons for it that could just be,
There's still a lot of effort that needs to be put in to build, say, a Sankey diagram or a core diagram in D3. So it's not like they're sort of out of the box, but there's still a lot of customization that is required. of those. And I feel like some of the recent enhancements of Tableau around extracts allow you to cheat data densification by doing a little data modeling. And you can just like, right now you can have extracts of your data model and just a single source of data. So you don't have to do like some fancy unioning of the data 30 times or 100 times to build some of this. So it does make it a lot more performant. That said, like it's still, in some sense I do agree with you, but again, why you can do it in Tableau because Tableau is great at processing data. D3, that's not like D3 is created to develop the front end visualization.
It could just be a last mile thing, right? Like the last mile, like you explore the data. Like I agree with you completely, Chris. Like I always think of Tableau as a great exploratory data analysis tool. It's great at EDA. You can course through so much data. You can create all these charts. You can understand all this stuff. You can throw all the data out. You can bring it all back. But maybe there is this missing element that people just aren't aware. And, I don't want to say they aren't aware of, but because I think this moment happens for journal, I think Alberto Cairo would be a great example of someone who would say, I would do all these things and then I would build it in Illustrator.
Yeah, I just think I think we're doing a great job of getting Tableau taken more seriously in the data visualization world. There's people who are really going, pushing the boundaries on that and getting us, out there. But I think with that comes responsibility to realize Tableau's limitations and where it shouldn't be used or where other tools are better to be used. And we need to be honest about that and not say Tableau is this panacea that you can just throw anything at it and it is the right tool.
I agree on that point. Definitely use the right, I think what you're trying to say is use the right tool for its purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are definitely some arguments around using Illustrator over Tableau in situations where maybe you want to put a lot of layers into your visualization. I mean, that's inherently something that would be used for Illustrator.
And I don't know enough about those tools to be able to say what should and shouldn't be done in there. I guess I often come back to the idea that if we're using Tableau, we need to use it for its strengths and not for its weaknesses. We need to make sure we're playing to the tools we've chosen strengths, and its strengths are doing things quickly, iterating, and getting something out there that is 80 or 90% perfect.
And you've already been trying to, one thing that you've been trying to do is with everyday dashboards to highlight those cases, right?
Yeah, exactly. Trying to get people to go back to the business dashboards and show some real life use cases. What are people actually using Tableau for away from these real edge cases that we see all the time and we spend too much time talking about? Because 99% of what people every day use it for are these dashboards that rarely see the light of day. I think the one challenge I'm having is trying to get people to share stuff. It's very difficult to spend the time recreating a dashboard without your business's data in it or without the logos and everything else. And it's very hard to get your company to agree to share their data as well. There's a lot of IP tied up there. So that's the biggest hurdle for everyday dashboards.
Yeah, I was actually talking with Anne about this like 2 weeks ago. I was like, I've sent Anne some screenshots of some of the work I've been doing. I'm actually developing for the first time in like 2 years. So I have some everyday dashboards that I need to convert into a generic version and share, because I feel like I follow a template for everything that I do. It's the same template. It works every time I use it. Individuals are like, yes, that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted a KPI, I wanted some detail, and then I drilled in and I saw some more detail. And it's not rocket science. So I want to be able to share just that generic approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sharing those real life use cases, and they're not necessarily the best dashboards. And I think again that's why people don't want to put the effort into sharing them, because what we do in our everyday life isn't going to generate lots of likes. It's not going to give you 100 retweets and have everyone saying how amazing it is, because it's functional. It's actually getting the job done, which I think we sometimes lose focus on as well.
kind of sad because my favorite data to work with is business data for whatever reason, because you don't know the answers to these things, because it is complex and it's messy, and because you have to kind of fight with people, and there's always some sort of compromise at the end. I mean, you get that hero's journey of a struggle when you're building something inside of the four walls of a business, whereas if you're building something on your own at home, you have complete independence and freedom to choose the direction you want to go, and what you build is right.
Yeah, and you get to say whether the end audience and who you're creating it for, and whether that's the right thing for them, because you literally define who you're building it for. When you're building it for other people, that they get to be a lot more critical about whether it meets their uses, and that's very difficult to replicate in anything that we do in the community, because you need a stakeholder, you need someone to say, no, that's not right, go down that route, which is very, very difficult to try and do in some kind of project, make over Monday style or workout Wednesday style. You just can't do it. And that's what I didn't want everyday dashboards to be. And what I've recently released some Viz challenges around doing things that aren't necessarily dashboards for different audiences. Write an analytical report for somebody who doesn't understand data at all, or record a video of a presentation to a finance person. Those kind of things. But I don't want them to be done on a certain day of the week. I don't want them to be done as a thing that people submit. I think we're already getting too much overloaded with visualizations that, let's just put it there as a resource that people can use, and if people want to use it, then they can.
Yeah, just as a point of reference for everybody, everydaydashboards.com. Chris hosts and maintains it. If it wasn't clear, he came up with the idea to be able to share some generic versions of dashboards that are being used in business that have been made generic. And I know that I've personally referenced it to clients to go and check out to get ideas, because they're the everyday analyst is looking for everyday ideas, and there's not a wealth of information out there. Like, you could hire someone full-time to create generic dashboards and fill this, and I guarantee it would be one of the most visited sites, because people just lack the ideas for what they need to be sharing. Okay, I need to do, they're not realizing, I can just create a ton of bar charts, and that's okay.
Yeah, I'll say for sure that I think we all have trained people in Tableau and in data visualization. I tell people to be aware of Tableau Public. I take them to the Viz of the day, and I say, you're not going to be building this. I'm sorry. Here, now let me take you to something like Everyday Dashboards. This is what you're going to be building. Let's drive through and understand what it is that we're trying to do. I think it also does a great job of demonstrating the constraints that are required within things, which is what I think a lot of people lose sight of initially, is let's make it a dashboard of everything, or let's add all these things, and really visually seeing that some of the most compelling everyday dashboards don't have a ton of filters, or they have limited interactivity that's very precise in how it's exposed.
I don't there was one point I don't know how far we've gone from this topic, but there was when we were talking about how do we get people to the point of they enter the community, and there are some really great individuals who are supporting new people to the Tableau community. But there also needs to be that point, right? You find your core team, and again, if you read the Creative Curve, it's a great book because it talks about what your team should look like that supports you. There also just needs to be individuals who are pushing the standards as high as possible in the community, so that we know, we've dubbed those people Zen masters in our heads, but they're not just Zen masters. They're people outside of that are just doing amazing work, and it's not title driven. It is quality driven. And how do we elevate those individuals who are doing quality work so that that can be the standard of which we're seeing, right? We just look at I'm just thinking the vehicles for the standard, and the vehicles for the standard are what's being retweeted by people which isn't always the standard. It might just be some really good eye candy, or maybe it's just people are friends of friends and it's an interesting topic, and then it doesn't necessarily, like, the quality isn't as high as it could be. And then the other standard is Visit of the Day, and so many people get really excited about Visit of the Day because it's been judged by Tableau Public as the standard of the best of the day, but doesn't necessarily mean that it's meeting the standard of where our community should be going. And like, how do we facilitate that? Like, we want to get people, you're in, we've got people supporting you, to up here.
I think so this is the first thing that comes to my mind is, like, Mike Cisneros does a good job of this, where he'll actually say why he thinks something is great or whatever it is, or why you should be looking at it from his perspective. So you could imagine him as someone in an elevated position saying, go look at this because of this. That's where we, and I'm guilty of this as well, probably could do a better job of. And that's what, like, I go back to Chris, like your Medium article where I talked about, I said, these are all the valuable things that happen as a result of it. And you posting that article and talking about how you went through your analytical process and what you learned, that's what really needs to exist. That's one thing I think that could exist more, that could help elevate and shine light on the great work, the high quality work, Luke, as you would put it, work that's being done, as opposed to just this sort of flat, superficial, you captured my attention, you get a heart.
Here's the why. It's great.
Yeah, I agree.
Here's the why.
And I think more leadership in just people doing that. We don't. I personally haven't created enough Tableau public visas this year. For whatever reason, I think focusing on data beats was definitely something that I wanted to do this year. So more and more people just creating content that is unique and isn't derivative in any way.
I think there's a place like everybody should eventually get to, where it's great to participate in all the community things that exist, but you're also going out on your own and developing original content.
Yes.
That's where I think you worry about not posting enough and losing your name being in the social media, but at the same time you've got to, like, people need to be comfortable with not having their name at the top of someone's feed every day or every week. It's okay.
Yeah. And I personally, I think I need to, perhaps we all need to do more of that, rather than maybe talking about the things we don't like to see. Create things that we do, turn it into a positive message rather than a negative one.
That's a great point. I think instead of saying, let's how can we set the standard? How about we set the standard?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm very curious now about Chris's number of visualizations he's created this year. So it's a good thing that there's a new application developed that I can just check this really quickly.
That is feeding into the problem of feeling like what you're creating is of, like, that, quantity over quality. Like, that is literally feeding into. I mean, it's not bad and it's not wrong to some degree, like, because there's two types of people. There's one type of person that just is interested and they want to get better. So having all these community tools, having all these things, having Makeover Monday, having Workout Wednesday, whatever, gives them an opportunity to theoretically learn the right ways to start finding the people that are eventually going to be their team, Luke. But to some degree, it needs to get to a certain level. But similarly, I don't think you should be condescending or negative of people that only want to contribute in that way. Not everybody's going to create new stuff, which is impossible.
No, I think, Chris, I'm actually looking at the numbers, like your Iron Viz entry on the U-boats. I would have expected far more engagement with, because it's super fascinating, and it's I guess it's about comes back to people's need to consume things really, 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 really fast and not sit down and think through what's in front of them.
And there's so much content now out there that people are producing every single day, especially for the InVis feeders. You have 50 visualizations that will all hit, real top quality visualizations that will all hit the social media and Tableau public all on a Sunday night, and trying to rise above that and get people to look at yours is very, very difficult. We almost need that content spread out across a whole year just so that people can engage with it. And that's not to mention all the content that gets produced every week with Makeover Monday and Workout Wednesday and everything else. So that's where, again, releasing quality is the wrong word, but thorough, thought out content. It's difficult because it doesn't necessarily get any more views than anything else anybody else does.
And just now that I'm in I also did not create a lot of original content this year by a lot, because Workout Wednesday chewed up my year. I'm just looking at, I had 3 InVis feeders and 1, 2, 3 4 original things.
Yeah, and that I think if you look on my profile, I'm about the same. And then if you look at the Data Beats profile where I publish those, there's probably about 8 or so articles on there that have got visualizations, and that's been it through the year. It's because I'm not participating in those things. But it's just a different way of doing things. Again, I've seen numbers in the hundreds. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just different.
That's the nice part, is that we're able to get different perspectives, and that's what we need to do as experts in the field, is learn what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's making sure it's exposing other people to those conversations as well. How do we get other people to be involved and see some of that and know that one person's opinion is just an opinion, and there's lots of other opinions. How do we expose multiple opinions?
That's why I like to just throw something random completely out there and just see what happens. Speaking of, I need to actually retweet again our podcast and from the last one and say, I am against Zen Masters and Ambassadors in IronViz. Here's why.
I think that's crap. Come on. If I put in the effort, why can't I was going to say, why can't I have everything? But why
can't I just throw something to make people think a little bit about it, though?
Well, what I've been pushing for, and I've actively campaigned about this to Tableau themselves, is to have consultants and contractors not be Zen Masters and Ambassadors, because I think those people should be doing that anyway, and they're doing it for, not all of them, but there's an angle that people like us or like me come from. I think it would be much better to have customers represented as Zen Masters, and maybe have a separate program for partners and people who work in the industry and get paid by that industry.
So I will say this though, Chris, this is my personal journey when it comes to, who's someone who is now a Zen, who came from industry, is I got out of industry because I felt like I was misunderstood. So I went into consulting to do more of what I wanted and to have people actually listen to me. So I think it's kind of difficult to say that there are going to be people in industry that are purely customers that are going to do this, because I do feel like maybe this is again personal bias. There's a lot of turbulence in analytical professions. There's a lot of turnover because of the type of work it is.
No, we had a huge problem with turnover at my last role when I was in business, and we turned it around by just not even paying more, just giving people more fun stuff to do, fun tools they enjoyed using, and focusing more on how to kind of, I guess, that side of things, rather than using crap tools that people then trained up in and wanted to do more exciting stuff with.
So let's fix that, Luke. we'll wrap it on this. Fix the analytics profession turnover crisis by giving people good tools.
Well, the thing is like people still end up doing the same thing. They just go somewhere else and then they run in the same situation. How about let's fix the lack of quality leaders and managers of individuals in this profession, and then and I guess that probably exists everywhere. I just feel like let's teach people how to manage better is the crisis.
Yeah, well, let's stop promoting analysts to be managers of analysts, because the two are very rarely kind of proportional. You know, if you're a good analyst, it doesn't mean you're going to be a good manager, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm with you. I go back to my call center days. The people that were the best on the phones, probably not necessarily the best managers.
No, yeah. And to be honest, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for being promoted, because I was a good analyst to, you know, managing analysts and then managing the development team. And then I eventually left because I was bored of filling out holiday forms and doing all that admin crap. So I wanted to get actual back to being on the coalface and actually building stuff. So it works both ways.
Yes. That said, Chris, thanks for joining us today. It was amazing. It was fantastic. Happy New Year, because this will definitely be coming out next year.
Yes, I will. It's been fantastic. I think covered a lot of really good points. Excellent conversation. Thank you for sharing your honest thoughts. I still don't believe that we probably argued as much as you wanted, but we can endeavor to make that better as time goes on.
Definitely. Yeah. No, it's been great. Thank you for having me. And I don't think we've solved anything. I don't think a lot of these problems aren't things we can solve, but I think it's good to have the conversations.
Just exposing others to what we're thinking. That's all.
Exactly.
While you have a captive audience,
I think we've covered a lot.
5 people. Our captive audience is more than that. We have a growing fan base. So how dare you?
It's quality, not quantity.
Exactly, which is why this is not on a normal frequency. It's just randomly done. Okay, hold please. Hold for music. I don't even know if this is... Ooh, hang on.
I think that was a worthy diversion from what we planned. Actually, it usually ends up an hour and a half, 2-hour conversation. And we get an hour of stuff, but the best stuff is the stuff that gets cut because we're just bullshitting.